That's so crazy. Donald Trump releases a list that includes all the fraud cases that the Department of Government Efficiency has published to date. The list isn't complete, but relevant items are being leaked here that would be reported as fraud in the US here. Here we have hundreds of billions in fraud cases that are now coming to light. All of this is tied to inflation and taxpayer dollars, leading to massive waste of money. This is also super relevant for Bitcoin, and we're going to take a look at what's behind it. Also, we just had a hearing in the Texas Senate about the strategic Bitcoin reserve, and that's now wrapped up. There's been a lot of positive coverage about Bitcoin here. They're even saying that in the long run, every fiat currency will drop to $0. Eventually, the US dollar will also fall to $0. So we now have a senator announcing and confirming the dollar crash, saying it's going to happen for sure. The dollar is going to crash. Vivek Ramaswamy, who is also a Bitcoin bull and on the Trump administration team, is now talking about Bitcoin being the new hurdle rate, the new benchmark by which every investor must measure themselves. And then we have MicroStrategy, which is now accumulating new money to buy even more Bitcoin. Super exciting what's going on here right now. But first, let's take a look at what's going on here with Donald Trump, what exactly he has uncovered here, and why this is also relevant for Bitcoin. He was here giving a speech and spent 5 minutes exposing one scam after another. I can't play everything here, but let's take a look at the most relevant parts. Check out what Donald Trump has to say here.
$520 million for ESG. $25 million to promote biodiversity, conservation, and promote licit livelihoods by developing socially responsible behavior in the country of Colombia. Well, it's nice, $25 million going to Colombia for something that nobody ever heard of. $40 million to improve the social and economic inclusion.
So we don't need to listen to the whole thing, but the exciting part is that everything is now coming to light. And I'll say it again, I've mentioned this in other videos too. Things aren't going to look much better in Germany or the EU either. We've got $520 billion, so almost $500 million, for an environmental consultant in Africa. I mean, that's just pointless. $25 million to promote biodiversity in Colombia. $40 million to improve the social integration of migrants. $10 million for voluntary male circumcision in Mozambique. How crazy is that? $9 million to the University of Berkeley for Cambodian youth. $32 million for the Prague Liberal Center. $14 million to improve public procurement in Serbia. $22 million for an inclusive political process in Moldova. Then there's $21 million for India to increase voter participation and improve political processes. $20 million for fiscal federalism in Nepal. $19 million for biodiversity in Nepal. So there's already some comedy here. $2.5 million for inclusive democracy in South Africa. Whatever inclusive democracy is supposed to mean here. And this is just the beginning of the list. Overall, it's the hundreds of billions of dollars that are being wasted here. And I'll say it again, this is all being paid for with taxpayer money. On the other hand, it's also being paid for by inflation. Because here, the money supply is just being expanded. This is financed through newly created money, new loans. And that's also relevant for Bitcoin, because with Bitcoin, such things wouldn't be possible anymore. The government would automatically be disciplined here if it could only spend the money it actually earns. And in the fiat money standard, it's really easy to finance such disgraceful acts with fiat money. And Elon Musk has already announced that he wants to put government spending on the blockchain. Then some people thought, okay, this is going to happen with Bitcoin. Yeah, that could happen, but it's probably not likely. He's probably going to do it with stable coins or something like that. You shouldn't get your hopes up too much that this is going to happen with Bitcoin. But still, this is a really, really strong argument for Bitcoin. With Bitcoin, this kind of fraud can't happen because Bitcoin has absolute transparency. And Bitcoin would also discipline a government. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. The big blows are still to come, like for example, Fort Knox, which is supposed to be audited. The Federal Reserve is supposed to be audited. The IRS is supposed to be audited. The SEC is supposed to be audited. That means all the big hits are still to come. And all of this absolutely plays into Bitcoin's hands. The more fraud is uncovered, the more fraud comes to light, the more Bitcoin benefits. Of course, not right now, but it's definitely always a good argument when the fiat money system, the traditional economic system, goes off the rails. The more the dollar wobbles, the stronger Bitcoin becomes. We'll get into that right now during the Senate hearing here in Texas to see what went down. Because here, there's a lot of positive reporting about Bitcoin. On the other hand, the fiat system is also being attacked and even exposed. But just read the excerpt here from Senator Schwertner. And here it was basically about evaluating whether a strategic Bitcoin reserve in Texas makes sense or not. And now check this out.
Warren Buffett is famous for saying that gold is just a shiny rock, right? But it has value in the eyes of the vast majority of people across the world. Right. Cryptocurrencies, historically, 5 years ago, were seen differently in the light of federal government and in individuals. I would say cryptocurrencies have become mainstream by individuals and obviously in the financial markets. The SEC regulated ETFs don't invest in the companies that produce Bitcoin. They're not buying miners, they're not buying exchanges. They actually purchase Bitcoin.
So that's a crazy story. Here, Bitcoin is being equated with gold. Here, he also says that Warren Buffett says that gold is just a shining stone here, but it still has some value. And it's the same with cryptocurrencies. Here, he makes the comparison that Bitcoin is also a raw material, and theoretically, it is some kind of a parent computer code or something like that. But even more people give Bitcoin a value because it has a certain limitation, because you can't just produce it from light, because it is censorship resistant, because it has other properties like it is transportable, it is divisible, and much more. And that's why Bitcoin definitely has value, even though it's not productive capital. In addition, he says that the whole topic of Bitcoin has changed massively because we now have institutional players on board. Thanks to the Bitcoin ETFs, we have a ton of companies and big players in the game now, asset managers, and we definitely have a different sentiment compared to 4 or 5 years ago. And that's being clearly recognized here. That's already a really important sign that Bitcoin isn't being laughed at, but rather recognized as a relevant financial asset. And this whole thing is happening in the Texas Senate. And Texas is also known for doing a lot of Bitcoin mining. Here he says, but also, hey, it's important that companies buy Bitcoin directly. It's not about Bitcoin mining or anything like that. Companies can hold Bitcoin directly through Bitcoin ETFs and don't have to invest in Bitcoin through miners or other vehicles.
It's like the GLD ETF, for instance, and they're massive ETFs. They're not small market cap ETFs. And again, the legitimacy at the presidential level, with the presidential working group on digital asset markets, with a stated goal of a strategic national digital asset stockpile, the United States Treasury classifying Bitcoin or referencing Bitcoin as digital gold in their published pieces of information. There is a shift and a change, and is brought about by spending and the value of the full faith and credit of the United States and other countries, which is something that is called into question. We always believe in the dollar, the green dollar, looking at a dollar, but you look at every country in the history of the world, their currency eventually goes to zero.
And that's just crazy. We actually have senators here at an official hearing talking about how the dollar is going to crash and fall to $0. So it's not Bitcoin that's going to crash, but the dollar is definitely going to crash. That's actually mathematically predetermined. If we look at history, simply statistically, it is almost unlikely that the dollar will survive when all fiat currencies have failed so far. And that's now being confirmed here in the Texas Senate. So crazy worlds we live in. It's emphasized again that Bitcoin is a big deal, that the ETFs are seeing a huge influx, and that it's not just something to laugh at, but something to take seriously. The gold comparison is being made again, and there is also talk about how sentiment has changed, that we are now in a different situation than we were just a short time ago. So Bitcoin definitely can't be taken lightly anymore. And if you make the gold comparison here and say that Bitcoin is digital gold, then you are also indirectly acknowledging that Bitcoin has the potential to exist for a very, very long time in relation to fiat currencies, which will definitely crash to zero. The question that still remains is whether Bitcoin will be purchased here as a strategic Bitcoin reserve in Texas. I mean, from what I heard from the senator, it sounds super bullish, so Bitcoin will definitely be bought here. But it's not just the senator who gets to decide. There are other people involved too. Of course, there were also some not so positive voices. That's always the case at a hearing. On one side, you have people who are super bullish, and on the other side, you have folks who are a bit critical. But overall, we need to keep an eye on this and see if Bitcoin actually establishes itself as a strategic Bitcoin reserve at some point. Not in the USA, but at least here in the state of Texas. And then we also have MicroStrategy, which has actually announced another $2 billion in new convertible bonds. So these are purchases that will potentially take place next week. Some people are now asking, okay, why is MicroStrategy buying less Bitcoin right now? I think that was last week because of the regulatory stuff, or maybe the week before when there was that meeting. Then the next purchases have been suspended, and now people are starting to say, okay, MicroStrategy can't raise any more money. But no, Michael Saylor has just taken a little breather. The new convertible bonds have already been announced, and with that, Bitcoin is expected to be bought again, which will pump the Bitcoin price back up. So Michael Saylor really doesn't care whether it's the bottom or the top. Michael Saylor is buying it all up. Check this out. I'm here at the beach, enjoying the last rays of sunshine at sunset. I went on a really cool motocross tour today and came straight to the beach to shoot another video. But the statement that really struck me today was from Vivek Ramaswamy, who is also part of Donald Trump's administration team. And he's addressing a post here. And in the post, it also mentions that there are indeed attempts to introduce Bitcoin as a hurdle rate at Microsoft. And in response to that, Vivek Ramaswamy says, let me read you what he wrote here because it's really fascinating. He says that now that the era of cheap money is over, companies and other institutions, even government players, need to rethink their minimum returns for internal capital investments. In this environment, Bitcoin is likely to become a more common investment for companies. It's an interesting trend that one should keep an eye on. And what was translated a bit oddly here was the minimum reserve. So they're talking about a hurdle rate here, and hurdle rate simply means what you set as a benchmark as an investor. Many set the hurdle rate based on US Treasury bonds. That means you're considered a good investor as soon as you beat the risk-free investment or the risk-free return. Once you do that, you're a really, really good investor. And for many traditional investors, that's the US Treasury bond. Then you say, okay, if you can beat the 2, 3, or 4% yield on Treasury bonds, then you're a good investor. And if you can't beat that 2, 3, or 4%, then you're considered a bad investor. Other people use the hurdle rate on the NASDAQ or on the SP 500. They say, okay, if I can make 10% a year, then I'm a good investor. But if we think in Bitcoin terms, then the risk-free capital we can accumulate, or the risk-free return, I should say, that we can pull out is always the compound annual growth rate of Bitcoin. For example, in the last 4 or 5 years, it was around 45%. And that's basically the hurdle rate, the risk-free investment that we can take with us. And as investors, we always have to ask ourselves, okay, can we achieve the 45% on average that Bitcoin has achieved over the last 4 or 5 years with our investment? Whether we buy a stock, a bond, a company, can we manage to top that? If we can beat that, then we're good investors. If we can't beat it, then we're a bad investor. And most people just can't manage to beat that hurdle rate. And that is the absolute game changer, that now even at the political level, Wilhelm Swamy is talking about Bitcoin being the new hurdle rate here. Because my hurdle rate is definitely Bitcoin. I always ask myself, with every investment or every financial decision, can I beat Bitcoin? Can I outperform Bitcoin with this? Most of the time, I come to the conclusion that I just have to keep holding Bitcoin. And in very, very few cases, the answer might be yes. Feel free to drop a comment below about what your current hurdle rate is. If you want to buy Bitcoin, I'll put a link down below to 21 Bitcoin, where you can easily, safely, and simply buy Bitcoin. With the code Bitcoin Hotel, you can get up to 20% off the fees when buying Bitcoin. And if you want to secure your Bitcoin as much as possible, I'll also put a link down below to a hardware wallet so you can easily, safely, and simply secure your Bitcoin. Guys, absolutely crazy. See you later. Peace out.